CEO despised beggars. Until street girl screamed, "Ma'am, your daughter is drowning." And she ran. Comment where you're watching from and subscribe for more shocking stories. The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the marble floor of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant as Charlotte Manning, CEO of Manning Industries, concluded another million-dollar deal. At 36, she commanded a $3 billion empire with the same cold precision that had made her New York's most feared businesswoman. Her platinum blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon, her designer suit worth more than most people's cars. "Another successful evening, Miss Manning," her assistant whispered as they exited into the frigid December night. Charlotte's steel blue eyes swept dismissively over the homeless figures huddled in doorways along Fifth Avenue. She'd built her fortune by ignoring distractions, and these people were nothing more than urban debris. "Get me to the car quickly," she ordered, her heels clicking against the sidewalk like a countdown timer. "I have the Tokyo conference call in 20 minutes. But as her black limousine pulled up to the curb, a small figure darted out from the shadows. A girl, no more than 8 years old, with tangled blonde hair and a face streaked with dirt, raced toward Charlotte with desperate urgency. "Ma'am, please, you have to listen." A child grabbed Charlotte's coat sleeve with tiny, trembling hands. "Your daughter Brooklyn is drowning in your pool right now. I saw it through the window." Charlotte jerked back with disgust. "Get this filthy child away from me," she snapped at her driver. "Call security." But the girl pressed on, her voice rising with panic. "She's wearing her pink dress with the unicorns. The babysitter collapsed by the roses. She's unconscious. Brooklyn went in after her ball, and she can't swim." Charlotte's blood turned to ice. Nobody knew about the pink unicorn dress. Nobody knew about the babysitter's location. Nobody should know these details about her private life. "Ma'am, she's telling the truth," the girl cried as Charlotte's face went white. "If you don't go now, she'll die. Please." Charlotte's hands shook as she yanked open the car door. "Drive to the Hamptons house now," she screamed at her driver. "Break every speed limit." As the limousine roared away, the little girl stood alone on the sidewalk, tears streaming down her dirty face, watching the taillights disappear into the night. Charlotte's limousine tore through the Long Island highways as she frantically dialed her Hamptons estate. No answer. Her heart hammered against her ribs as worst-case scenarios flooded her mind. How could that dirty street child know such intimate details about her home? "Faster!" she screamed at her driver, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the leather seats. The 40-minute drive felt like an eternity as Charlotte's world tilted on its axis. When they screeched into her circular driveway, Charlotte didn't wait for the car to stop. She bolted toward the backyard, her designer heels sinking into the manicured lawn. The sight that greeted her made her soul leave her body. Brooklyn, her precious 6-year-old daughter, floated face down in the illuminated pool, her pink unicorn dress billowing around her like a tragic flower. The babysitter, Maria, lay unconscious near the rose garden, exactly where the street child had described. Brooklyn. Charlotte's scream pierced the night as she dove into the pool without hesitation, her $5,000 suit instantly ruined. The icy water shocked her system, but adrenaline propelled her forward. Charlotte pulled her daughter's lifeless body from the water. Brooklyn's lips were blue, her skin cold and pale. No pulse, no breathing, no. Charlotte sobbed, placing Brooklyn on the pool deck. Her hands trembled as she began CPR, pumping her daughter's tiny chest. "Come back to me, baby. Please. 1 minute, 2 minutes. 3 minutes of desperate compressions and rescue breaths." Charlotte's tears fell onto Brooklyn's still face as she begged God, the universe, anyone who would listen. "Don't leave me, Brooklyn. Mommy's here. Mommy's here. At 4 minutes and 37 seconds, Brooklyn suddenly convulsed and expelled a rush of pool water. Her eyes fluttered open, confused and frightened, but beautifully, miraculously alive. "Mommy," Brooklyn whispered weakly. Charlotte collapsed with relief, cradling her daughter against her chest. "You're okay, baby. You're okay." But as they rushed to the hospital, one thought consumed Charlotte's mind. How did that homeless child know? How did she save Brooklyn's life from 20 miles away? The doctors confirmed Charlotte's worst fears. 2 more minutes underwater would have caused irreversible brain damage or death. Her daughter owed her life to a stranger she treated with contempt. A stranger who somehow saw the impossible. For 3 weeks, Charlotte Manning became a woman possessed. The mystery of how that little girl knew about Brooklyn's accident consumed every waking moment. She hired the city's most expensive private investigators, offered a $50,000 reward, and personally scoured the darkest corners of New York City. "Find her," Charlotte commanded her team of investigators. "I don't care what it costs. Find the child who saved my daughter." But the streets of New York had swallowed the girl whole. Charlotte placed full-page ads in every newspaper, visited dozens of shelters, and walked through neighborhoods she'd never imagined existed. For the first time in her privileged life, she witnessed true poverty. Children sleeping on cardboard, families huddled around trash fires, the desperate fight for survival happening just blocks from her penthouse. The search changed her. Each night, she returned home haunted by the faces of forgotten children. How many Rileys were out there, invisible to people like her? "Ma'am, we've checked every registered shelter in the 5 boroughs," her lead investigator reported. No child matching that description. Charlotte's frustration boiled over. Then check the unregistered places. Check the tunnels, the abandoned buildings everywhere. Brooklyn, now fully recovered, watched her mother's obsession with growing concern. "Mommy, why are you looking for the dirty girl? She made you sad. She saved your life, sweetheart," Charlotte whispered, kissing her daughter's forehead. Sometimes angels come in unexpected forms. On a freezing February night, Charlotte found herself under the Manhattan Bridge in Brooklyn, an area her driver had refused to enter. The bitter wind cut through her wool coat as she searched among the homeless encampments with a flashlight. "Hello? I'm looking for a little girl, about 8 years old, blonde hair." Most people scattered at her approach, but an elderly man pointed toward a dark corner. "Check under the overpass. But lady, be careful. That kid, she's different. Knows things she shouldn't know." Charlotte's pulse quickened as she followed his directions. There, curled up in a cardboard box with newspapers for blankets, was the child who'd haunted her dreams. The girl was even thinner than before, her lips blue from cold, clutching a filthy teddy bear. "Hello," Charlotte said softly, kneeling beside the makeshift shelter. The girl's eyes opened slowly, and Charlotte gasped. Those weren't the eyes of an 8-year-old. They held an ancient sadness, a depth of pain that seemed impossible for someone so young. "I knew you'd come back," the girl whispered, her voice barely audible. "Mothers always come back, eventually. I learned that from watching movies through store windows." Charlotte's hands trembled as she wrapped her cashmere coat around the shivering child. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Riley," the girl whispered, her teeth chattering uncontrollably. "Riley. I don't have a last name anymore." Charlotte's heart shattered at those words. She gently lifted Riley from the cardboard box, shocked by how light the child felt, nothing but skin and bones. "Come with me. Let's get you warm and fed." At the Plaza Hotel, Charlotte ordered the finest suite available. As she ran a warm bath for Riley, she was horrified by what she discovered. The child's ribs were clearly visible through her pale skin, her arms covered in bruises from sleeping on concrete. When Riley stepped into the warm water, she sighed like someone who'd forgotten such comfort existed. "When did you last have a real meal?" Charlotte asked, fighting back tears. "I found half a sandwich yesterday," Riley replied matter-of-factly. "Sometimes the nice lady at the deli gives me bread that's too old to sell." Charlotte ordered everything from room service: soup, sandwiches, fruit, cookies. Riley ate like a starved animal, stuffing food into her mouth while simultaneously hiding rolls in her pockets for later. "Honey, you don't need to hide food anymore," Charlotte said gently. "There's plenty." "That's what they all say," Riley replied, her ancient eyes meeting Charlotte's. "But food disappears when you're not looking, just like mothers do." The words cut deep. "Tell me about your mother, Riley." Riley reached into her torn pocket and pulled out a photograph, so worn and faded it was barely recognizable. "She was beautiful," Riley whispered. "Golden hair like yours. She held me when I was a baby, but then she left." Charlotte took the photograph with shaking hands. The world tilted as she stared at the image. Despite the damage and fading, she could make out enough detail to recognize the impossible truth. The woman in the photograph was her. 16 years younger, but unmistakably, her dot memories came flooding back like a dam bursting. Being 20 years old, pregnant, terrified. Her family's fury. The forced adoption. The baby she'd never been allowed to hold. "My God," Charlotte whispered, the photograph falling from her trembling fingers. Riley watched her carefully. "You remember now, don't you? The nurse who took me away. She gave me this picture. She said my mommy loved me, but couldn't keep me." Charlotte's world exploded. This wasn't just any homeless child. This was her daughter, her firstborn. The baby she'd been forced to give up 8 years ago. "Riley." Charlotte's voice broke completely. I'm your mother." Riley nodded solemnly, as if she'd known all along. "I've been looking for you my whole life. That's how I knew about Brooklyn. I've been watching our family from far away, hoping someday you'd see me." Charlotte collapsed to her knees, pulling Riley into her arms. "My baby, my precious baby, I never wanted to leave you. They made me, they forced me." Charlotte's hands shook as she dialed her parents' number. Riley curled up beside her on the hotel bed, finally sleeping peacefully for the first time in years. The child's breathing was still labored from malnutrition, and Charlotte's rage grew with each shallow breath dot at the Manning family estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. Theodore and Margaret Manning sat in their mahogany-paneled study, surrounded by portraits of 5 generations of family wealth and power. They'd built an empire on control, manipulation, and the ruthless elimination of anything that threatened their perfect facade. "Mother, Father, we need to talk." "Now," Charlotte's voice was ice cold when they answered. "Charlotte, darling, it's nearly midnight," Margaret replied in her refined Connecticut accent. "Whatever it is can surely wait until morning." "No, it cannot wait. I found Riley." The silence on the other end was deafening. Finally, Theodore's voice came through, carefully measured. "I assume you mean the homeless child who helped with Brooklyn's accident. Very charitable of you to cut the act, Father. I know who she is. I know what you did." 30 minutes later, Charlotte stormed into her childhood home with Riley in her arms. The child had awakened during the car ride, and Charlotte could feel her trembling as they entered the imposing mansion. Theodore Manning, 65 years old with silver hair and cold gray eyes, sat behind his massive desk like a king holding court. Margaret, 62 and perfectly coiffed despite the late hour, perched on the leather sofa with the posture of someone who'd never been challenged in her life. "So," Theodore said without looking up from his brandy, "you found our little problem." Charlotte's blood turned to fire. "Problem? She's your granddaughter." "She's a mistake," Margaret interjected sharply. A youthful indiscretion that should have been handled properly years ago. Riley pressed closer to Charlotte, her small body shaking. She'd heard these voices before, Charlotte realized. During visits to the adoption agencies, during the rejections. "Tell me everything," Charlotte demanded, her voice deadly quiet. "Tell me why my 8-year-old daughter has been living on the streets." Theodore finally looked up, his eyes as cold as winter steel. "You were 20 years old, Charlotte. Pregnant by that worthless college boyfriend who disappeared the moment he learned about the baby. It would have destroyed our family's reputation. So you forced me to give her up for adoption. We arranged for her placement. Yes, Margaret said primly, with a lovely family in Connecticut. Liar. Charlotte's voice echoed through the room. She's been homeless. She's been starving. Theodore's mask finally slipped, revealing something monstrous beneath. The first family had concerns about her behavior. She was returned within 6 months. And the second family? Charlotte's voice was barely controlled, also found her challenging. Riley finally spoke, her voice small but clear. They paid them. Everyone turned to stare at the child. I heard the lady talking on the phone. She said the rich people paid her extra money to bring me back. Margaret's face went white. Theodore's jaw tightened dangerously. You paid families to reject her? Charlotte's voice rose to a scream. You sabotaged every adoption? We ensured she would never become a public embarrassment to this family, Theodore said coldly. We couldn't risk her appearing later in life, claiming to be a Manning. You destroyed her life to protect your reputation? We protected all our lives, Margaret added. Including yours, Charlotte. You have Brooklyn now. You have the company. You have everything you could want. Why ruin it for this remnant of a mistake? Riley buried her face in Charlotte's shoulder, her small body racked with silent sobs. Charlotte felt something break inside her chest, not just her heart, but her very soul. She's not a mistake, Charlotte whispered fiercely. She's my daughter, my firstborn, and you turned her into a ghost to protect your precious reputation. Theodore stood slowly, his full height imposing. Choose carefully, Charlotte. You can have your legitimate life, Brooklyn, the company, your place in society. Or you can destroy everything for a child who represents nothing but shame. Theodore Manning moved to his desk and withdrew a thick manila folder, his movements deliberate and menacing. Since you seem determined to be emotional rather than practical, let me show you the reality of your situation. He spread photographs across the mahogany surface images of Charlotte bringing Riley to the hotel, of them shopping for clothes, of Riley playing with Brooklyn in Central Park. Charlotte's blood ran cold. You've been followed since the moment. You found her, Theodore said with quiet satisfaction. We have documentation of your erratic behavior over the past 3 weeks. Abandoning business meetings to search homeless camps, spending company money on private investigators, bringing an unknown street child into contact with Brooklyn. Margaret joined him, her voice dripping with false concern. Darling, we're worried about your mental state. This obsession with this child, it's clearly affecting your judgment. Riley pressed closer to Charlotte, her small hands clutching at her mother's designer dress. What are they saying, Mommy? They're threatening us, sweetheart, Charlotte replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Theodore opened another folder, this one containing legal documents. These papers will remove Brooklyn from your custody immediately. We have sworn statements from 3 child psychologists stating that your recent behavior indicates severe emotional instability. You can't do that, Charlotte breathed. Brooklyn is my daughter. Brooklyn is a Manning, Margaret corrected coldly, and we will not allow her to be endangered by your breakdown. Dr. Whitman has already signed an evaluation stating that bringing a disturbed street Child into Brooklyn's environment constitutes child endangerment. Charlotte's world spun. Dr. Whitman has never even examined me. He's been our family physician for 30 years, Theodore replied smoothly. He understands the importance of protecting Brooklyn from unfortunate influences. Riley suddenly spoke up, her voice stronger than before. I saved Brooklyn. I saw her drowning, and I found her mommy to help her. Margaret looked at the child with undisguised disgust. No one will believe the fantasies of a damaged street orphan over the testimony of respected medical professionals. Theodore moved closer, his presence intimidating. Here's your choice, Charlotte. Send this child back where she belongs to the system and retain your life as you know it. Brooklyn, the company, your social standing, everything remains intact. Or, Charlotte asked, though she dreaded the answer. Or lose everything, Margaret finished. Brooklyn will be placed in our custody for her own protection. Manning Industries Board will vote you out for mental instability. Your assets will be frozen pending psychological evaluation. You'll lose everything you've worked for. And for what? A child who reminds everyone of your biggest mistake? Riley had been listening to every word, her young face growing paler with each threat. Suddenly, she pulled away from Charlotte and stood facing the imposing grandparents she'd never known. I remember you, she said quietly, her voice carrying an eerie certainty. You came to the first home. You told them I was problematic. You gave them money to say I was bad. Theodore's face darkened. You're mistaken, child. No, Riley continued, her eyes never leaving his. You've been following me my whole life, making sure no one would keep me, making sure I'd never have a family. Margaret stepped forward menacingly. You little... Don't you dare. Charlotte's voice cut through the room like a blade. She stood and pulled Riley protectively behind her. Don't you dare speak to her that way. Choose now, Charlotte, Theodore demanded. Brooklyn and your life, or this street rat and nothing. Charlotte looked down at Riley, seeing her own eyes. Staring back eyes that had seen too much pain for someone so young. Then she thought of Brooklyn, asleep at home, innocent and protected. I choose my family, Charlotte said firmly. All of my family. Theodore smiled coldly. Then you choose to lose everything. So be it. Charlotte awoke the next morning to her worst nightmare. 3 black sedans surrounded her Manhattan penthouse as she tried to leave for breakfast with both girls. Brooklyn clung to her hand while Riley stayed close, sensing danger in the air. Ms. Manning? A stern-faced woman in a gray suit approached with official documents. I'm Sandra Walsh from Child Protective Services. We have an emergency court order for the immediate removal of the minor known as Riley from your custody. On what grounds? Charlotte demanded, pulling both girls closer. Concerns have been raised about your mental stability and the safety of both children in your care. Walsh replied coldly. Multiple witnesses have testified that you've been exhibiting erratic behavior, endangering a legitimate child by introducing an unknown street vagrant into the home. Riley's grip on Charlotte's hand tightened. Mommy, I don't want to go back. You're not going anywhere, Charlotte said fiercely, but even as she spoke, more officials emerged from the vehicles. Dr. Elizabeth Whitman, the family physician who'd never examined Charlotte, stood beside a police officer. With a smug expression, Charlotte, this is for everyone's safety. The child needs proper psychological evaluation and institutional care. She needs her mother. Charlotte screamed as officers moved to separate them. But the legal machinery Theodore Manning had set in motion was unstoppable. Within hours, Riley was removed from Charlotte's home and placed in Riverside Children's Institution, a sterile facility in upstate New York that the Manning family had generously funded for decades. The next blow came that afternoon. Margaret Manning arrived at Charlotte's penthouse with her own team of officials and a second court order. I'm sorry, Charlotte, Margaret said with false sympathy as Brooklyn hid behind her mother. But Brooklyn needs a stable environment while you undergo psychological evaluation. She's my daughter. She's our granddaughter, Margaret corrected. And we won't allow your obsession with that street child to damage her further. Brooklyn, only 6 years old, was caught in the crossfire. Mommy, I'm scared. I don't want to. Live with Grandma and Grandpa. Brooklyn, darling, Margaret said in her sweetest voice, your mommy is sick right now. She needs time to get better. Wouldn't you like to stay in our big house with all the toys and games? I want to stay with Mommy, but the court order was absolute. Charlotte was deemed emotionally unstable and potentially dangerous to both children. Brooklyn was removed to the Manning estate, while Charlotte was served with a restraining order preventing her from coming within 500 feet of either child. That evening, alone in her empty penthouse, Charlotte received a call from her corporate attorney. Charlotte, I'm sorry to inform you that the board has called an emergency meeting. There are serious concerns about your recent behavior affecting company operations. The meeting was a bloodbath. Theodore had orchestrated every detail. Board members who'd been loyal to Charlotte for years now questioned her judgment. Evidence was presented of her erratic spending on private investigators, her abandonment of corporate responsibilities, and her dangerous obsession with a homeless child. Ms. Manning has clearly suffered some form of breakdown, Dr. Whitman testified via video conference. Her fixation on this street child represents a complete detachment from reality. She's convinced this random vagrant is somehow her daughter, despite having no legal or biological proof. The child saved Brooklyn's life. Charlotte protested. According to only your testimony, Theodore replied smoothly. No one else witnessed this alleged incident. It's possible you fabricated the entire scenario as part of your psychological episode. By week's end, Charlotte had lost everything. The board voted her out as CEO, citing mental incapacity. Her assets were frozen pending psychiatric evaluation. Riley remained locked in the institution, while Brooklyn was legally placed under her grandparents' protective custody. Charlotte's last visit with Brooklyn was devastating. Her daughter, confused and frightened, had been coached by Margaret for days. Mommy, Brooklyn said hesitantly, Grandma says you're sick because you brought that bad girl home. She says you forgot about me because you love her more. Charlotte knelt down, tears streaming. Brooklyn, that's not true. I love you both. But Grandma says she's not really our family. She says you made her up because you're confused. She's your sister, Brooklyn. Your big sister who saved your life. But Brooklyn pulled away, conditioned by weeks of manipulation. I don't want a sister from the streets. I want my real mommy back. 6 months later, Charlotte Manning sat in a cramped studio apartment in the Bronx, her manicured hands now rough and cracked from scrubbing floors. The woman who once commanded boardrooms now cleaned office buildings at night to afford a $500 per hour lawyer who barely returned her calls. Her designer clothes had been sold months ago. Her jewelry, her car, her penthouse all liquidated to fund the legal battle she was steadily losing. She wore second-hand clothes and ate ramen noodles, experiencing poverty for the first time in her privileged life. The mirror showed a stranger staring back hollow cheeks, graying roots, eyes that had lost their spark. The mighty Charlotte Manning had fallen further than she'd ever imagined possible. Mrs. Manning, her court-appointed attorney, said during their brief meeting in a dingy office, the prosecution has filed additional charges. They're claiming you're stalking your own daughter by requesting visitation rights. She is my daughter. Charlotte's voice cracked with exhaustion. Not according to legal documentation. Riley has no birth certificate linking her to you. The DNA test you requested was denied because you're not her legal guardian. As far as the court is concerned, she's an unrelated homeless child you became obsessed with. Each month, Charlotte was allowed one supervised visit with Brooklyn at the Manning estate. These visits were torture. Her daughter, now 7, had been completely turned against her. "Mommy, why did you choose that dirty girl over me?" Brooklyn asked during one heartbreaking visit, her words obviously coached by Margaret. "I didn't choose anyone over you, sweetheart. I love you both. But Grandma says you gave away all my college money to look for her. She says you don't care about me anymore." Charlotte's supervised visits with Riley were equally devastating. The child had been placed in solitary confinement at Riverside Institution, supposedly for aggressive behavior toward staff and other children. She's been classified as a high risk placement, the facility director explained coldly. Multiple adoption attempts have failed. The child exhibits signs of severe attachment disorder and pathological lying. Charlotte knew the truth. Riley was being systematically destroyed to prevent any future connection to the Manning family. The staff treated her with clinical indifference, following instructions to keep her isolated and broken. During one visit, Riley looked skeletal, her once bright eyes now dull and lifeless. "Mommy," she whispered, "they tell me every day that you don't really want me. They say you only visit because the court makes you. That's not true, baby. I'm fighting every day to bring you home. The doctor says I make up stories about having a real family. He says I'm sick in my head." Charlotte's heart shattered completely. "Really, you are my daughter. You saved Brooklyn's life. You are wanted and loved." But Riley's faith was cracking under months of institutional gaslighting. Maybe they're right. Maybe I just imagined having a mommy who loved me. Meanwhile, the media painted Charlotte as a cautionary tale. "Billionaire CEO's mental breakdown," read the headlines. "Wealthy woman's obsession with homeless child destroys family." Theodore had orchestrated every story, presenting himself as the concerned father trying to protect his granddaughter from his mentally ill daughter. Charlotte's final humiliation came when she was served with papers banning her from all Manning properties and limiting her to one supervised visit per month with either child, never both together. That night, in her roach-infested apartment, Charlotte stared at the stained ceiling and whispered, "I'm losing them both. God help me, I'm losing everything." 18 months after finding Riley, Charlotte Manning hit rock bottom. Her bank account showed $127.43. Her electricity had been shut off for 3 days. She hadn't eaten a full meal in 48 hours, surviving on coffee and whatever food samples she could find at grocery stores. The woman who once owned a $3 billion empire now worked 3 jobs, cleaning offices at night, stocking shelves at dawn, and washing dishes during lunch shifts. Her hands were permanently stained. Her back ached constantly, and she developed a persistent cough from the cold apartment. Charlotte Manning? The social worker's voice was tired as she delivered the monthly update. "I'm afraid I have difficult news about both children." Charlotte gripped the phone with shaking hands. "What now?" "Riley has been moved to a higher security facility. She's been deemed unadoptable and psychologically damaged beyond rehabilitation. The recommendation is long-term institutional care until she ages out of the system. She's only 9 years old. She's also been classified as having severe behavioral issues and delusional thinking patterns. No family will take her now." The second blow was worse. Brooklyn has been asking to change her last name to Manning, officially, and requesting that all references to you be removed from her records. She's told the family court judge that she doesn't want a mother who chose a stranger over her real daughter. Charlotte collapsed against the grimy wall of her apartment building's hallway. "They've poisoned her against me completely. Mrs. Manning, perhaps it's time to consider moving on. You've lost everything fighting for a child who isn't legally yours, and you're losing the child who is." That night, Charlotte received a smuggled letter from Riley. written in shaky 9-year-old handwriting. Mommy, they moved me to the bad place. They say I'm crazy because I keep talking about you. They say I made up having a real family. I try to remember your face, but it's getting harder. The medicine they give me makes everything fuzzy. I still have your picture, but it's so worn you can't see it anymore. Are you really my mommy, or did I dream it? I'm scared I'm forgetting you. They say you don't visit anymore because you gave up on me. Is that true? I love you, but I'm forgetting how to hope. Please don't forget me, even if I'm broken. Charlotte sobbed until no tears remained. The letter had been delivered by Maria Santos, a janitor at the facility who took pity on the isolated child. She talks about you constantly, Maria whispered during their clandestine meeting in a parking garage. But she's fading fast. The isolation is destroying her spirit. Meanwhile, Brooklyn's monthly visits had become exercises in heartbreak. Her daughter, now 8, had been completely indoctrinated by the Manning family. I have a new mommy now, Brooklyn announced during their last visit. Grandma Margaret is going to adopt me properly, so I won't have to see you anymore. Brooklyn, I'm your real mother. I carried you for 9 months. I love you more than life itself. My real mother wouldn't have abandoned me for a crazy street girl, Brooklyn replied, parroting Margaret's words perfectly. Grandma says you were never a good mother anyway. She says you were always too busy with work to love me properly. Charlotte reached for her daughter's hand, but Brooklyn pulled away. I don't want to touch you. Grandma says you might give me the same sickness that made you imagine that other girl was your daughter. Walking home through the dangerous Bronx streets that night, Charlotte contemplated ending it all. She'd lost both daughters, her fortune, her health, and her hope. What was left to fight for? But then she thought of Riley's letter, of a 9-year-old girl slowly losing her sanity in institutional isolation, believing she'd been abandoned again. I won't give up, Charlotte whispered to the empty street. Not on either of you. Charlotte's salvation came from the most unlikely source. She was washing dishes at a downtown diner when a well-dressed Asian woman approached her table during her break. Charlotte Manning? The woman's voice was professional but kind. I'm Sarah Chun, family law attorney. I've been watching your case for months. Charlotte looked up wearily. I can't afford another lawyer. I've already lost everything. I'm not here for money, Sarah said, sliding into the opposite booth. I'm here because Theodore Manning destroyed my family 15 years ago, and I've been collecting evidence ever since. Charlotte's exhausted eyes sharpened. What do you mean? Sarah opened a thick briefcase filled with documents, photographs, and recorded conversations. My younger sister was dating a Manning cousin in 2009. When she got pregnant, the family used the same playbook they used on you: forced separation, paid adoptions, deliberate sabotage of family reunification. You have proof? 5 years' worth. The Mannings have systematically destroyed at least 7 families to protect their reputation. They have a network of corrupt officials, paid doctors, and compromised social workers. Your case isn't unique. It's part of a pattern. Sarah spread photographs across the diner table. Dr. Whitman has signed false psychological evaluations for the Manning family 12 times in the past decade. Judge Morrison, who ruled against you, has received substantial donations to his re-election campaigns from Manning Industries. The director of Riverside Institution? His salary is supplemented by a Manning family trust. Charlotte's hands trembled as she examined the evidence. How did you get all this? I've been working undercover for years, documenting their corruption. But I needed the right case, one high profile enough to make the evidence stick. Your story, Charlotte, could bring down their entire operation. But why help me? You don't even know me. Sarah's eyes filled with pain. Because my sister killed herself 3 years ago. She never got over losing her daughter to Manning manipulation. I swore on her grave that I'd stop them from destroying another family. The evidence was staggering. Secret recordings revealed Theodore bragging about handling problem children and ensuring family embarrassments disappear permanently. Financial records showed payments to adoption agencies specifically to reject Riley multiple times. Most damning was a recorded conversation between Margaret and Dr. Whitman. "The child must never be adoptable," Margaret's voice was clear. "Keep her institutionalized and damaged until she ages out. She can never be allowed to surface as a Manning heir." "What about Brooklyn?" Charlotte asked, desperately. "They're planning to have Margaret legally adopt her next month," Sarah revealed. "Once that happens, you'll lose all parental rights forever. They're also moving Riley to a psychiatric facility in Montana, essentially making her disappear completely. We have to stop them." "We will. But Charlotte, when this goes public, it's going to be brutal. The Manning family will use every dirty trick to discredit you. Are you prepared for that war?" Charlotte thought of Riley's letter, of her daughter slowly losing hope in institutional isolation. She thought of Brooklyn, being raised to hate her own mother. "I've already lost everything," Charlotte said firmly. "What more can they take?" Sarah smiled grimly. "Then let's destroy them." The next morning, Sarah filed a massive lawsuit against the Manning family, Riverside Institution, Dr. Whitman, and 12 other co-conspirators. The charges included kidnapping, fraud, child endangerment, conspiracy, and corruption of public officials. But Theodore Manning's response was swift and vicious. Within hours, Charlotte was arrested on fabricated charges of stalking and harassment. The local news portrayed her as a delusional woman obsessed with strangers' children. As Charlotte sat in a holding cell, Sarah's words echoed in her mind. "This is just the beginning. They're going to try to destroy your credibility completely. But we have the evidence to prove everything." The war for Riley and Brooklyn had officially begun. Sarah Chun's legal assault hit the Manning empire like a hurricane. Within 48 hours of filing the lawsuit, she had obtained emergency injunctions, preventing Riley's transfer to Montana and temporarily halting Margaret's adoption proceedings for Brooklyn. "Your Honor," Sarah addressed Judge Patricia Rodriguez, who had replaced the compromised Judge Morrison, "we have irrefutable evidence of a systematic conspiracy to separate families and traffic children through institutional manipulation." Theodore Manning sat in the defendant's section. His usual commanding presence diminished as Sarah presented her evidence. The courtroom gasped as recorded conversations played through the speakers. Margaret's voice filled the room. "That street rat must never be allowed to claim Manning blood. Keep her broken. Keep her isolated. Keep her forgotten." Dr. Whitman's response was equally damning. "I've already falsified her psychological profile. No legitimate family will ever consider her adoptable now." Charlotte, released on bail through Sarah's intervention, watched from the gallery as her family's crimes were finally exposed. Brooklyn, now 8, sat confused between her grandparents, too young to understand the full implications, but old enough to sense the gravity. The media explosion was instant. Manhattan billionaire family's child trafficking scandal dominated headlines nationwide. Cable news ran continuous coverage as more families came forward with similar stories. "This is Maria Gonzalez," Sarah announced, introducing another victim. In 2018, the Manning family paid her cousin's adoption agency $50,000 to reject her. Nephew repeatedly, ensuring he remained in institutional care rather than recognizing his potential, claimed to a Manning inheritance through his father's bloodline. 7 families testified about Manning interference in their lives. The pattern was identical. Identify potential embarrassing connections to the family, then systematically destroy them through legal manipulation and institutional abuse. Riley's testimony, delivered via video link from her facility, was heartbreaking. Now 10 years old, but appearing much younger due to malnutrition and psychological trauma, she spoke in a barely audible whisper. "They told me every day that was unwanted, Riley said, her hollow eyes staring at the camera. They said my mommy only pretended to care because she felt sorry for me. They gave me medicine that made me sleepy and confused. When I cried for my family, they put me in the quiet room alone. The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of Charlotte's quiet sobbing. But Theodore Manning wasn't finished. As the evidence mounted against him, he played his most vicious card. "Your Honor," his attorney announced, "we're prepared to present evidence that Charlotte Manning has been coaching this child to lie about their relationship. We have psychiatric evaluations proving that Ms. Manning suffers from delusional maternal syndrome, a condition where women become convinced that random children are their biological offspring." The defense presented their own witnesses. Dr. Harrison Vale, a prestigious psychiatrist who claimed Charlotte showed classic signs of maternal delusion syndrome triggered by guilt over her legitimate daughter's near drowning. Ms. Manning, Dr. Vale testified, has created an elaborate fantasy where a homeless child is actually her lost daughter. This delusion allows her to cope with feelings of inadequacy as a mother to Brooklyn. But Sarah was ready. Dr. Vale, isn't it true that you've received over $200,000 in consulting fees from Manning Industries over the past 2 years? The doctor's confident demeanor cracked. That's not relevant to my professional assessment. Isn't it also true that you've never actually examined my client? Your entire evaluation is based on reports provided by Dr. Whitman, who we've already proven falsified documents for the Manning family. The turning point came when Brooklyn herself took the stand. Margaret had coached her extensively, but children have a way of speaking truth despite adult manipulation. "Brooklyn," Sarah asked gently, "do you remember the night you almost drowned?" "Yes," Brooklyn whispered. "Do you remember who saved you?" Brooklyn looked confused, glancing between Charlotte and her grandparents. "Mommy saved me. She jumped in the pool." "But how did Mommy know you were drowning?" The girl told her." Brooklyn's voice grew smaller. "The girl from the street. Did you ever see this girl before that night?" "No, but—" Brooklyn paused, her young mind working through years of manipulation. "But she knew about my dress. She knew about Maria being sick." "How did she know?" Margaret's face went pale as Brooklyn continued. "Grandma always said the girl was lying, but how could she lie about things she couldn't see?" The Manning family scandal exploded into a national sensation, with major networks covering every moment of what media dubbed the trial of the century. Charlotte, now living in a modest Queens apartment funded by Sarah's law firm, watched her life dissected on television. This case represents more than family dysfunction, legal analyst Amanda Stevens reported on CNN. It exposes how wealth and influence can corrupt the very systems designed to protect children. The courtroom was packed as Sarah presented her most damaging evidence. Phone records showed hundreds of calls between Theodore Manning and adoption agencies across 5 states. Financial records revealed a systematic network of payments designed to make Riley unadoptable. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Sarah's voice rang with conviction, "this isn't about money or family reputation. This is about a little girl who has spent her entire life being told she doesn't deserve love, doesn't deserve family, doesn't deserve to exist." Riley, now 11 but still appearing fragile from years of institutional trauma, gave her final testimony in person. She had been removed from the harsh facility and placed in therapeutic foster care, slowly beginning to heal. "They told me I was bad," Riley said, her voice stronger than before, but still carrying years of pain. "They said I made up stories about having a real mommy. But I always knew Charlotte was my mommy because—" She paused, touching her heart. "Because when she held me, I felt safe for the first time." The prosecution played secretly recorded conversations from Riverside Institution, revealing staff members discussing how to break the child's spirit and ensure she remained institutionally dependent. Margaret Manning finally cracked under cross-examination. Sarah's relentless questioning about the payments to adoption agencies and the systematic abuse of Riley wore down her composed facade. "You paid families to reject her, didn't you?" Sarah pressed. We protected our family's interests," Margaret admitted, her voice shaking, "by ensuring a 9-year-old child remained homeless and traumatized. She represented a threat to what? Your reputation? Your money? Your granddaughter's inheritance?" Margaret's composure shattered completely. Yes, we paid them. We made sure she could never claim to be a Manning. She was a mistake that needed to disappear. The courtroom erupted. Even Theodore's attorneys looked stunned by Margaret's. Confession.Brooklyn, now 9 and beginning to understand the truth, asked to speak to the judge privately. In chambers, she made a request that surprised everyone. "I want to see Riley," Brooklyn said simply. "I want to meet my sister." The reunion was arranged at the courthouse under careful supervision. Charlotte held her breath as her 2 daughters saw each other for the first time since that night at the Plaza Hotel. Brooklyn approached Riley cautiously, then suddenly ran forward and hugged her tightly. "I'm sorry," Brooklyn whispered. "I'm sorry they hurt you. I'm sorry. I believed them when they said you weren't my sister." Riley, tears streaming down her face, held Brooklyn close. "You saved my life by almost drowning," she said. "Because that's how Mommy found me." The jury deliberated for only 6 hours. They found the Manning family guilty on all counts: conspiracy, child endangerment, fraud, and systematic abuse of the adoption system. But the verdict was only the beginning of Charlotte's fight to rebuild her shattered family. The legal victory felt hollow as Charlotte faced the devastating reality of rebuilding 2 broken lives. Riley, now 12, suffered severe trauma that manifested in nightmares, panic attacks, and an overwhelming fear of abandonment. Every time Charlotte left the apartment, even briefly, Riley would spiral into terror. "Mommy, please don't go." "Riley!" Wold scream, clinging desperately to Charlotte's clothes. "What if you don't come back? What if they take me away again?" Brooklyn, now 10, carried her own burden of guilt and confusion. She had spent years believing her mother had abandoned her for a stranger, and reconciling that lie with reality proved agonizing. "I said terrible things about you," Brooklyn sobbed during one of their family therapy sessions. "I told the judge you didn't love me. I'm so sorry, Mommy." Dr. Jennifer Walsh, their family therapist, worked patiently with all 3 as they navigated the complex trauma. "Healing isn't linear," she explained to Charlotte during a private session. "Riley has spent most of her conscious life believing she was unwanted. Brooklyn has been systematically turned against you. This will take years, not months." The financial settlement from the Manning family allowed Charlotte to purchase a modest house in a quiet Connecticut suburb, far from the painful memories of Manhattan. She chose not to rebuild her business empire, instead founding the Riley Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to preventing family separation through institutional manipulation. The transition was achingly slow. Riley would wake up screaming from nightmares about being sent back to institutions. Brooklyn struggled with survivor's guilt, wondering why she had been chosen, while Riley suffered. Charlotte battled her own demons, guilt over the years she'd failed to find Riley earlier. "Some days I feel like we're strangers trying to become a family," Charlotte confided to Sarah during one of their regular check-ins. The damage runs so deep, but there were breakthroughs. The first came when Riley finally slept through the night without nightmares 3 months after moving to the new house. The second came when Brooklyn proudly introduced Riley as "my sister" to her new classmates. The third breakthrough was the most profound. During a particularly difficult therapy session, Riley finally expressed the anger she'd buried for years. I hate them for making me think I wasn't worthy of love, she screamed. I hate them for making me believe I was crazy. Charlotte held her shaking daughter as years of suppressed rage poured out. You were always worthy, baby, always. That night, for the first time since her rescue, Riley voluntarily hugged Charlotte and whispered, I forgive you for not finding me sooner. I know you tried. 2 years after the trial, the Manning family's fall from grace was complete. Theodore faced federal charges and died of a heart attack before sentencing. Margaret, stripped of her wealth and social standing, lived in a modest, assisted living facility. Her mind slowly deteriorating from dementia. Charlotte received an unexpected call on a snowy February morning. Ms. Manning? This is Elmwood Care Center. Margaret Manning is asking for you. She says she needs to make amends before she forgets everything. Charlotte's first instinct was to refuse. The woman had systematically destroyed Riley's childhood and poisoned Brooklyn against her. But Riley, now 14 and remarkably wise beyond her years, surprised her. I want to see her, Riley said quietly. I need to understand why she hated me so much. Brooklyn, now 12 and fiercely protective of her sister, shook her head. She doesn't deserve to see us after what she did. Forgiveness isn't about what people deserve, Riley replied with startling maturity. It's about freeing ourselves from their power over us. The three drove to the care facility together. Margaret Manning, once the epitome of refined elegance, sat in a wheelchair, looking frail and confused. When she saw them, her eyes cleared momentarily. Charlotte, she whispered, tears streaming down her weathered face. I'm so sorry. I was so afraid of losing control, of scandal, that I forgot we were dealing with a child's life. Riley approached her cautiously. Do you remember me? Margaret's eyes filled with recognition and shame. You're the little girl I tried to erase. Oh God, what did I do to you? You tried to make me disappear, Riley said simply, but I survived. And now I'm going to help other kids who are going through what I went through. Margaret reached out with a trembling hand. Can you ever forgive a foolish old woman who was too proud to admit her mistakes? Riley was quiet for a long moment, then took Margaret's hand. I forgive you, Grandma. Not because you deserve it, but because carrying hatred for you was hurting me more than it was hurting you. Brooklyn watched in amazement as her sister showed grace beyond her years. Later, as they prepared to leave, Margaret made one final request. Charlotte, I've left everything to you and the girls in my will. Use it to help other families. Use it to undo some of the damage we caused. That evening, as they sat by their fireplace, Charlotte marveled at her daughters. Riley had not only survived unimaginable trauma, but had emerged with incredible strength and compassion. Brooklyn had overcome years of manipulation to become Riley's fiercest advocate. I'm proud of both of you, Charlotte said, pulling them close. You've taught me that family isn't just about blood. It's about choosing to love each other every day, even when it's hard. Riley smiled, the haunted look finally fading from her eyes. We're not perfect, but we're together. That's what matters. 3 years later, Charlotte stood on the same Manhattan Bridge where she'd first found Riley sleeping in cardboard. Now, it was Riley's 16th birthday, and they'd made this annual pilgrimage a family tradition, returning to where their journey began. Make a wish, sweetheart, Charlotte said, as Riley blew out the candles on her birthday cake. Riley closed her eyes, then smiled. I wish that every broken family finds their way back to each other, just like we did. Brooklyn, now 15, wrapped her arm around her sister. You know what's crazy? If I hadn't almost drowned, we never would have found each other. Everything happens for a reason, Riley replied, her voice strong and confident, no longer the broken child from the streets. Charlotte pulled both daughters close, gazing at the city skyline. The Riley Foundation had helped reunite over 200 families torn apart by institutional manipulation. Riley herself had become its youngest advocate, speaking at conferences about survival and hope. I used to think success meant building an empire, Charlotte reflected. But my real empire is right here, my daughters, who taught me what love really means. Riley looked at the spot where she used to sleep, then at her family. Mom, I've been thinking about that night when I found you outside. The restaurant. I think somehow I always knew you were my mother. My heart recognized you before my mind did. Hearts always know, Charlotte whispered, tears in her eyes. Love finds a way. As the sun set over Manhattan, 3 figures stood together on the bridge, no longer broken, no longer separated, but whole. Their scars had become their strength. Their pain had transformed into purpose. Riley spoke softly. You know what the best part is? We chose each other. Not just once, but every single day. That's what real family does. Charlotte looked at her daughters, one born from her body, one born from her heart, and realized she'd found something more valuable than any fortune. Unconditional love that conquered everything. We're home, she whispered Dot, and finally they were.